I thank my friend from Oregon, my friend from Alaska, for their leadership, and like they, I support extending the helium program. This is a good and important program that is critical to industry, it's critical to jobs, it's critical to our high-tech community. And I salute both the Senate and House for a positive bill that generates revenue for the federal Treasury and that gets the government in time out of the helium business. I think that is a good and positive step. I would note that the House of Representatives passed a bill that continued this program, but that devoted the revenue that came from this to deficit reduction. And in a time when our national debt is approaching $17 trillion, I think devoting that revenue to deficit reduction is a good and appropriate place to direct that revenue. When the bill came to the Senate, this bill is projected to generate approximately $500 million in new revenue for the federal government over 10 years. When it came to the Senate, roughly $400 million in new spending was added to the bill that came out of that $500 million that was generated. And in my view, given the fiscal and economic challenges in this country, that revenue would be better spent paying down our deficit, reducing our national debt, than it would be on new spending. And indeed, over the course of this week, I've had numerous conversations with my colleagues where I've urged them that if new spending were to be added, for them to endeavor to find other areas of federal spending that could be reduced, that could be cut to make up for that, so that we could devote the full $500 million to reducing the deficit. I think that would be the most fiscally responsible approach to be taken. That being said, and for that reason, I have had concerns about proceeding on this bill with unanimous consent, proceeding on this bill authorizing an additional $500 million in new spending without debate, without a vote. And earlier in this week, I had lodged internally an objection to do so. Now, I'm pleased to note that in conversations with Senator Murkowski and Senator Wyden, we have reached an agreement where this matter will not proceed by unanimous consent, but rather will proceed with a roll call vote to be scheduled this afternoon, where each senator will cast his or her vote. And with that agreement, I am happy to withdraw any objection and allow us to go forward. I would note it is important for economic growth and for the high-tech industry to maintain this program, but at the same time, I hope that going forward, that when new spending is authorized, that all of us work to cut spending to compensate so that we can devote the maximum resources possible to paying down our deficit, paying down our debt. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator, yield for a question. So do I understand, Senator Cruz, that you don't oppose to the bill as passed in the House that would have authorized this program to go forward, but your concern is that there's new revenue being generated that's being spent for other programs?
That is correct. Now, in terms of a technical offset, the spending is offset by the revenue. So I'm not arguing that it fails to offset in the typical language of the Senate, but rather my concern is that's $500 million in new revenue that could be directed to deficit reduction. And given the magnitude of our national debt, if we have $500 million in new revenue from selling helium, sending it to the private sector, I would far rather see that $500 million used to pay down our deficit. And so what I've urged my colleagues to do is if there are new spending programs that are of particular concern to the citizens of their states, to find other aspects of the federal budget that could be cut to offset it so that that entire $500 million could go to deficit reduction rather than to funding the new spending.
Would the Senator yield just for a question? I'm going to ask a question, just respond to Senator Sessions' point in one sentence. There are differences between the House bill and the Senate bill. The House bill does not get the government out of the helium business permanently. The Senate bill gets the government out of the helium business permanently. It does it in a way that is fully offset, A, and B, not only is it offset under our proposal, passed unanimously in the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, $51 million would actually be used to lower the deficit. So there is a full offset, get the government out of the helium business, permanently, and $51 million would be returned to be used for deficit reduction. So what I'd like to do by way of just moving things along, and Senator Cruz has been very gracious in terms of his handling of this and saw me on short notice, and I'm very appreciative. Senator Cruz, I would like to propound the unanimous consent request at this time. I'm asking the senator a question, if this is acceptable, and then we'll go right back to what my colleagues would like. I would like to ask the senator from Texas if we would now move to ask unanimous consent that at 2 p.m. the Energy Committee was discharged from further consideration of the House bill, and the Senate proceed to its consideration, and that the substitute amendment, which I have been discussing and you and I have talked about, is at the desk, be agreed to. We would then have 15 minutes of debate, equally divided at two, divided between yourself and myself or our designees, that upon the use or yielding back of time, the bill as amended would be read a third time. The Senate would proceed to vote on passage of the bill as amended, that motions to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the tables, all of the above occurring with no intervening action or debate. I ask the senator from Texas, would that UC be acceptable to him?
And I'm pleased to tell my friend it would be acceptable. I have no objection to that, and I appreciate your willingness, along with Senator Murkowski's willingness, to allow this to come to a roll call vote so that each senator may be on record with their views on this bill.
When the senator who's been good enough to yield me the time has completed his time with Senator Sessions and colleagues that he may want to yield to, I will then propound that UC request. We don't anticipate any objections. Colleagues would know that we would then have a vote shortly after 2. I thank Senator Cruz for his courtesy.
Well, Mr. President, I would just say this. We need to get it in our heads in this body that just because you raise revenue and pay for a new spending program, that doesn't have implications for the federal treasury and the budget. In fact, we've got rules that guard against that. Senator Cruz, I thank you for raising and highlighting that. We need to consider it, because the idea that you can just do that is a dangerous thing, and it creates more taxing and more spending, more revenue and more spending. And as you raised the point, just because you raise revenue doesn't mean that the people who raise the revenue get to spend it on what they want. You're perfectly correct to say, I think it should be used for debt reduction, and I thank you for raising the issue. I would yield the floor.
I thank the senator from Alabama, and I yield the floor.